Welcome back. It is Heritage Day, but it's not all about colourful celebrations, traditional attire, languages and cuisine. There's a growing concern that some of the nation's key heritage endowments may be at risk of being lost and forgotten. Lovedale Press in Alice in the Eastern Cape is and has been in such a predicament for several years now, and that's where you find my today engagement with various voices. I do need to take you to Alice, where Thulasizwe Simelane, my co-anchor, is waiting to have a debate with some university professors.
Yeah, absolutely, Maseko. Thank you. We are live from the Lovedale Press in Alice at Dikeni in the Eastern Cape. Of course, this is a site of much historical significance in South Africa. The site where we are right now is not the original Lovedale Press. We've got to stress that and emphasize this. But it's the most direct lineage to that original Lovedale printing press, which has brought us so many momentous, turns in terms of the history of this country and the intellectual output of Africans. And I mean, you can cite many, many examples, Maseko, that have been produced at Lovedale. I mean, many people will think of the TV dramas, Ityala Lamawele. From the early 90s to mid-90s, it was on television. Well, it was an adaptation of a book by S.E.K. Mkai, which was published here at Lovedale Press, Ingumbo Yeminyanya, by A.C. Jordan, also done here at Lovedale Press. In fact, Ityala Lamawele has sort of taken on another significance in that, in as much as it's a fictional tale that gripped many, many South Africans, but many authorities still look to it, particularly those who practice in the area of law, to inform their views about certain issues around customary law. What can I tell you about Imvo Zabansundu, 1884? As far as records go, it is recorded as the first newspaper to be published in a Nguni language, in a Bantu language, let's put it that way. That's what it's called, Bantu language publication. In fact, the words outside this building where we are, the words of A.C. Jordan, the literary icon, record that to say the earliest record of any Bantu-speaking African writing in their own language can be traced to the printing presses here at Lovedale. So that's the significance of the place where we are. And of course, not far from here is University of Fort Hare, 100-odd years old institution. The two link together, as well as other institutions here in the Kyume Valley in the Eastern Cape. But it's in dire straits is Lovedale Press. Its continued survival is in question, given that it's about to turn 200 years old in 2023. So how do we keep it going? And what's at stake here in terms of the history that we are likely to lose if it shuts down completely? Let me bring into the conversation Unathi Kondile, the former editor-in-chief of Thulasizwe Simelane, as well as Atambile Masola, Dr. Atambile Masola from Historical Studies at the University of Cape Town. Dr. Masola, let me start with you, and towards the end of the conversation I will bring in Busisiwe Jemsana Mandashe, who speaks on behalf of the Department of Arts and Culture here in the Eastern Cape. But Dr. Atambile Masola, let me start with you. Just your sense, if someone was to say to you, why on earth is that Thulasizwe Simelane from eNCA and everyone else khunning on, as South Africans would say, khunning on about Lovedale Press today? Why does it matter?
Thank you so much, Thulasizwe, for the conversation and really creating this space. I think you've mapped out the history so carefully. And for me, the fact that 200 years of the Lovedale Press is deeply connected not only to our intellectual history, but our cultural heritage as well, in the sense that publication in isiXhosa has a long history, in African languages, let me say, because the Lovedale Press didn't only publish in isiXhosa, it also published in other African languages as well. So in more recent years, there's been this narrative that Black people don't read, Black people are not interested in reading African languages, and we have this kind of literacy crisis in our schools. That is completely bizarre when we look at the history and the work that Lovedale, because the literature that they produced was for adults and was for a school audience as well. So, for example, was reading books by the Lovedale Press when she was a child in primary school. So it seems strange to find ourselves here because the history belies where we are. We should be far, far ahead because of the 200-year history that you have painted. And it's really such a pity that we have not used that important foundation to build on, not only for our present, but also to think about the future of the Lovedale Press so far as a new Lovedale Press that can survive in the 21st century. So for me, I think it's important to connect where we are right now and question why is it that we couldn't connect with what has already been laid down.
Fantastic. I really like the way you put it there, Dr. Atambile Masola. Unathi Kondile, just your sense then of the treasure and the value of Lovedale, Lovedale College, but also Lovedale Press in the history of South Africa, particularly in as far as the written word, written in isiXhosa and other African languages is concerned.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. I disconnected a bit there.
So I was asking just your sense then of Lovedale Press's place in the history of South Africa, and as well as recording in written form the languages, the African languages, particularly isiXhosa.
Look, I think we've lost a lot there. Thank you, Thulasizwe, for the question. I think that we've lost a lot. It is meant to be a very relevant place. A place where our literary heritage is contained, but sadly it has become very irrelevant today. I'm sure you have seen how it looks like today. You have seen the current building they are renting behind a fruit and veg site. You have seen the old books that are scattered all over, that are packaged, that are not catalogued properly. You have seen the old letter press that is there. And I'm sure you see the potential for reviving such a place and making it, building it, printing newspapers there again. So I see it as a place that is still very relevant to this day, but I think that we need to inject a bit of life into it, and we need to be more serious about bringing it back, because that is the home of Black literary heritage, or the Black. It is, in a sense, our literary heritage encapsulated into an institution, which is now sadly renting a little space in Alice. Its former building sits up there as, I think, a funeral parlor today. So we need to find a way of bringing this place back to life. Thank you, Thulasizwe.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there, Unathi Kondile, because part of the conversation that I've been, grappling with is the conversation about the precarious state of preservation of institutions such as the Apartheid Museum, for example, as well as more recently the conversations that have been happening around Lily's Leaf Farm in Johannesburg. And I keep asking myself, what kind of a people are we that would be in a position where we are losing such rich heritage, preservation of our history? Unathi, let me stick with you for a moment and ask you, in your reading, what are some of the factors that have led to the situation where we are, where you have three people who come to Lovedale Press to basically open the door to show people that, you know what, there's still some establishment going on, but basically nothing much happening. These machines that are behind me, they've been lying idle for quite some time, not being able to do anything, as you say, the picture being what you paint. In fact, the building behind us here, the fruit and vegetable shop, expanding itself slightly into what is currently Lovedale Press. How did we get here, from what you can understand?
I'm scared to answer this question, but I'm going to be brutally honest, and with all due respect, who have kept the place going, who are the last remaining staff members who have kept that place going. But in all honesty, at this stage, it's a matter of human resources. They were employees at Lovedale Press way back then, and they do not have the skill set nor the managerial skills to run a place like that. So it would need a curator or someone who has the skill set to run a business so that there's a business model in place. So ever since it was taken over by the staff, many high-profile people have come in there as CEOs and run it and left in the past. But it was then left over to the last 8 remaining staff members. Of that 8, it is now the 3 that you surely have met there. So imagine leaving a company with your staff members that were not necessarily managers, but were helping out in printing. So we are here because there has not been a of managing this particular institution as a business. At the end of the day, it's a business. Secondly, there has been no support at all from the governance structures. You cannot have a literary heritage site like that and not have arts and culture actively involved. It should be belonging to some entity of government by now, or there should have been some curator placed in that place so that it can be taken out of where it is today. So there's still hope and a potential for it, but we need to be honest about what is going on there right now.
Unachikondile, I'm nodding my head vigorously as you are speaking, particularly about the role of other stakeholders in ensuring that we preserve this heritage. In a moment, I will give the final word to Paulo Jordan, who knows this history, as I keep saying, like the back of his hand. In fact, the very first instances of me knowing about this was through him and him narrating this history. But before I do that, I think, Unathi, where you take us is a good point to bring in Busisiwe Jemsana Mantashe on behalf of the Department of Arts and Culture in the Eastern Cape. Busisiwe, thank you for coming through. So, I mean, we're seeing this site and it's heartbreaking, to be quite honest. Just give me a sense of your department's understanding of this site's role in the history and heritage of the Eastern Cape, but also of South Africa, Southern Africa, and the African continent.
It's heartbreaking indeed, Thulas, that we find Lovedale Press in this state. But let's also reiterate that it is a business, like Unathi has said, it is a private business. But nonetheless, it remains an important literary heritage that we carry, not only as a province, but also as a country at large. This is where eNCA were published, Izimvo Zabantsundu, when we had no voice as Abantu Abantsundu. The Lovedale Press was that voice for us. And so it continues when we look back and reflect at where we come from as a nation, as a black people. We can't mention that history without mentioning Lovedale Press, and it's very unfortunate that we find it in this situation. But it does not get to this situation without us having tried to help. We have tried as the department, we have tried to intervene, we have been working and having various engagements with the shareholders of Lovedale Press. We've been buying their books from them, we've been buying their material so as to try and make sure that they are afloat. But as Unathi said, there seems to be a lack of a managerial or an eye for business, because in 2017, in our efforts to try and support it, we couldn't continue because they were not tax compliant, they were not paying their taxes, and unfortunately you can't do business with government without paying your taxes. But be that as it may, we still continue to try and get access to their material and see if we then can't support them and make sure that this rich history or heritage of ours does not die.
All right, I might give you a final take as well there, Busisiwe, if we still have time, but I do want to bring in Paulo Jordan into this conversation. Mr. Jordan, it's good to have you back. It seems you and I have been talking quite a bit these last few days. I keep saying to people that you know the history that we are narrating here like the back of your hand, and throughout these broadcasts today, I've been doing my best to recall all the titles and the names that are associated with Lovedale College and the rich heritage that comes from here. But let's hear it from you. What is at stake should we not be able to preserve Lovedale Press, which is just 2 years short of turning 200 years old in one form or another?
Well, I think as the speaker from the Eastern Cape was saying, Lovedale Press is one of the most important heritage sites both in the Eastern Cape and in the country. This is a press that gave us the beginnings of a literature in the indigenous African languages. The first books in isiXhosa were published at Lovedale, and subsequent to that, Lovedale played an important role also publishing South African Outlook, a journal that it produced year after year, and whose heritage has been preserved by Professor Francis Wilson in a volume he put together called Outlook on a Century. That is a rich collection of literary, political, and other production on the part of indigenous Africans in their own languages and in English. It has an unenviable place, I think, in the literary history of the African continent as well, Lovedale Press. We must remember that almost from the time it was opened, Lovedale welcomed not only students from South Africa, but from beyond South Africa's borders. There were students here who came from what were known as the protectorates, Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland. There were students who came here from Zimbabwe. There were students who came here from as far afield as Tanganyika and Kenya. There was also for a very long time here at Lovedale a small colony of slaves who had been emancipated by the British, some by Livingstone, and some by British naval ships in the Indian Ocean who had intercepted slavers that were taking slaves from the African continent to various parts of the world. Amongst those, interestingly, was the grandmother of the late Dr. Neville Alexander, who was brought to Lovedale, having been rescued from a slaver somewhere to the east of Ethiopia. There were also the Gala slaves who had been rescued by Livingstone and brought to Lovedale. So it has a very, very, very important place as a heritage site, not only for South Africa, but for the continent as a whole. It would be a scandal, I would say, if the former graduates of Lovedale allowed the Lovedale Press Trust to disappear. It's not as if they aren't graduates of Lovedale who now have some money, and they owe their capacity to earn money to the education they received at Lovedale. I think they have a responsibility, and I call upon them to rescue the Lovedale Press.
Yeah. Paulo Jordan, with those words and your summing up of the history, but also the charge and the challenge to those who are alumni of Lovedale College and the various institutions here in the Eastern Cape, I think that's a good point to end it. I hope, South Africa, that we've started the conversation. We've highlighted the challenges to one of our key sites of heritage, a really proud history of Lovedale Press, as well as other institutions within the area of Alice here in the Eastern Cape at Duquesne. The challenge is now with us. What kind of people are we? Are we really going to allow ourselves to keep losing such sites of historical importance? And I guess I will go back to those words again. If we're not careful, Zemginko Mamakwalandin. Take care. This has been All Angles, live from Duquesne in Alice.